Okay, I think the participants are just starting to come in now, so I'm going to make a start. Hello and welcome. I'm Harriet Cross and I'm the British Consul General to New England. So I'm based in Boston, Massachusetts. I am a huge supporter of enabling people to be who they want to be and celebrating that. So it was a great honour to be asked by the British Embassy to introduce this session today. So Pride Month is coming to a close. We've done a ton of stuff, but today we are particularly excited to mark the occasion by partnering with Athlete Ally and the Amazin LeThi Foundation to host this virtual event. So sports leagues are slowly returning following the COVID shutdown, and a discussion of LGBTQ+ inclusion in sports feels really important and as timely as it's ever been. And I am super excited to hear about this fantastic set of British and American speakers that we've got with us today. They're going to share their experiences, and I just can't wait to hear about it. So this event is part of the British government's Love is Love campaign, which I think has been one of the best campaigns I've seen almost ever. We've been holding it for the last few years. We've been doing a lot in the past few weeks. We've talked about human rights. We've talked about entrepreneurship, sports and creative industries. And we've got more events coming in July. So please do follow the British Embassy on Twitter, which is UK in USA. You can learn more about these events and how you can get involved. So I just want to say a few words about why the British government organises events like this before we really start. I am super proud to be a British diplomat who represents a government that is such a strong advocate of LGBTQ+ rights and the LGBTQ+ community in the UK, but also abroad. We take great pride, no pun intended, in the work that government, civil society and organisations like those we've got with us today have done to advance these rights. The UK is recognised as one of the most progressive countries in Europe for LGBTQ+ rights, and that gives me it gives me shivers down my spine actually, because at a time like this to be able to be so proud of your country is really special. We've got one of the strongest legislative frameworks to prevent and tackle discrimination, including on the grounds of sexual orientation and gender reassignment. Gay marriage equality has been in place in England, Wales and Scotland since 2014, and more recently in Northern Ireland. The British Parliament now has the highest number of openly LGBTQ+ parliamentarians of any country in the world. We've got 52 LGBTQ members of Parliament just elected now in the most recent election. So that's fantastic in terms of representation and making a difference for the future. Our Foreign Office, where I work, and our militaries are both committed to promoting inclusive behaviours and having a more diverse workforce. LGBTQ citizens have been able to serve openly in the UK military since 2010, and we've got a number of LGBTQ+ diplomats and ambassadors serving in embassies around the world. So as I've said, I'm super proud of all we do abroad, as well as at home. So we were one of the first countries to join the new Equal Rights Coalition, and we are the current co-chairs. And we work on behalf of 42 countries to pressurise some of the 70 countries that still criminalise homosexuality around the world. And we want to encourage, not just encourage, but urge and push them to uphold the rights of their LGBTQ citizens. We're one of the few governments to provide same-sex marriage services at our embassies and consulates. I've never done one. I am desperate to do one. So you know what? If ever I can marry anybody, please let me know, because it's one of my life aims. So we do it in 26 countries around the world, and it's it's important kind of from a kind of bureaucratic standpoint, but it's also a really visible way of demonstrating our support for the community and same-sex marriage. And we always publicise these marriages almost whenever we do them. We were also one of the first foreign governments to march in pride parades here in the US. I have been a proud marcher in all the Boston marches for the last 4 years I've been here. Just last year, the UK government participated in Pride in 13 cities around the US, very visibly. And this year marks the 8th straight year, I think, no pun intended, that we have participated in Pride activities. So that is really positive, and will continue. So coming to today's discussion, I am super proud of our LGBTQ athletes, not least for how they represent the UK, but simply for the fact that they are winning medals and just being awesome in their own right around the world. But there's much more we can do to ensure greater inclusivity and representation for our LGBTQ athletes. I don't want all the positive things I've said to suggest that we don't have to work harder, because we do need to work harder. And so I really look forward to hearing from our speakers as to how we can do that, and how not only the British government, but people like you, people on the call, how you can help. So on that note, I want to say thank you very much to the participants and to everybody who's attending today. And I'm going to turn over to Anne Lieberman, who's the Director of Policy and Programmes for Athlete Ally, and she's going to moderate the discussion. So that's all from me. Over to you, Anne. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Harriet, and thank you so much for that perfect framing and introduction to today's conversation. As Harriet mentioned, my name is Anne Lieberman. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Director of Policy and Programs for Athlete Ally. So Athlete Ally is a nonprofit organization. We are based in New York City, but we do work globally. And we work to dismantle the structures of power that isolate, exclude, and endanger LGBTQI+ athletes in sport. And I am thrilled to be moderating this conversation today with three of my absolute favorite humans, athletes, activists who have such amazing knowledge to drop on you all this afternoon, evening, morning, whenever you happen to be tuning into this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and let each of them introduce themselves, because as I joked when we were in the green room earlier, if left to my own devices, I would be talking about each of them for the duration of this panel. So I will let them do that. Michael, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Michael Gunning. I'm an international swimmer. I've been to 2 World Championships, and I'm extremely lucky because I've represented 2 nations over my swimming career so far. My mum was born in Great Britain and my dad was born in Jamaica. So I was born in the UK and I represented Great Britain for most of my junior and into my senior career. And it wasn't until 2016 that I've started to represent Team Jamaica, which is amazing because 2 nations that are both close to my heart. I've represented them, which is amazing. I came out as gay in 2018, actually on a TV show. So it was very strange, but I think for me as a swimmer, I suppressed my sexuality for so long, you know, being not really wearing much clothes around poolside. And I think the environment I was in and, you know, that I felt pressured in, I just really, you know, suppressed my sexuality. So I came out as gay back in 2018. And since then, you know, I'm really pushing for diversity inclusion all around the world. And, you know, as a Black swimmer as well, kind of flying the flag for swimming and the sport that I do, I just want to show that everyone is accepted for who they are. So that's me.
Thank you, Michael. Jaycee, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jaycee Cooper. I am a competitive powerlifter here in the United States. I'm a 4-time state record holder and 2-time national champion across 2 different sports. I'm actually a former curler as well. And I'm also the co-director of an advocacy and charitable organization called Pull for Pride. We do events across the United States and raise money for organizations that directly benefit the LGBTQ community. And I guess just to talk a little bit about my background, in 2018, when I was attempting to participate in the Minnesota State Championship here in the United States in USA Powerlifting, the national governing body actually decided that trans people were not allowed to compete whatsoever. So I'm coming at it from an angle of exclusion and fighting for inclusion in my sport. So in 2019, myself, along with the help of advocates at Pull for Pride and Gender Justice and Athlete Ally, we filed a charge of discrimination at the state level with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, and have been fighting ever since to really bolster inclusion in sport. So that's kind of my background.
Thank you, Jaycee.
Yeah.
Amazin.
realized I was on mute. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this afternoon. My name is Amazin LeThi, and my pronouns are she and her. I'm an athlete ally ambassador, and last year I became the first Asian Stonewall UK ambassador. And really through my own journey of being bullied at school when I was a child and not really seeing myself at all through sports and through my journey through homelessness, I launched the Amazin LeThi Foundation that looks at developing leadership, sports and education programs for LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness. All my work globally is centered around having conversations of how you can use sport as a platform for equality through the Asian lens, and how you can champion LGBTQ equality in sports to increase the visibility of Asian LGBTQ athletes in sports. This year, I became the first Asian LGBTQ athlete to be honored at the Brooklyn Nets Pride Night before COVID. And I just became a 2020 global change maker. And I'm now training, since retiring from competitive bodybuilding, I'm now training in competitive shooting to hopefully start competing next year now because of COVID this year.
Thank you, Amazin. So just a quick housekeeping note before we get started. We will have time for questions at the end for folks who are joining us on Zoom. If you want to pop any questions in the chat box, I'm happy to collect all of them and ask them at the end. So if you're worried you're going to forget your question, please feel free to pop it in the chat box. So my first question for each of you, all three of you are athlete ally ambassadors. You have made a commitment to speak up and out on LGBTQI plus inclusion in sport, but that has happened far before your time with Athlete Ally. So I'm hoping that each of you can talk a little bit about why you made the decision. Was there an inciting moment in your career where you said, you know what, I want to use my platform for social justice and for LGBTQI plus activism. Amazin, why don't we start with you?
For me, it's really through my own journey of, I've always been involved in sports throughout my entire life, but I just never saw myself in sports. I was the only Asian kid in any kind of sports team. So when I went out into the field, I suffered a terrible amount of racism and bullying from my teammates, from other teams, from my coaches, and from the sports organizations that I played in, and always feeling very isolated and alone in sports that I just loved. And that continued when I started competing as a competitive bodybuilder. I went from team sports to individual sports and suffered a terrible amount of misogyny and sexism in a very heteronormative sport that told me right from the start that there could be no out athletes in bodybuilding. It just wasn't a possibility. And the one athlete that did come out lost, all their sponsors, and the whole federation just turned on that athlete. I've been bullied throughout my entire life in sports as a woman, being Asian, particularly being Asian in sports, and being LGBTQ in sports. That really led me to that activism that I do today, because I still don't see the visibility for Asian LGBTQ athletes in professional sports, or even just Asian athletes in professional sports that you should see. And I realized that, if I have a platform, I should use it, because I know what it felt like when I was that athlete and never heard my story and never felt like anyone was standing up for me. And I know that, athlete activism is so important, because if I don't stand up, then I'm part of this continuing cycle that's, occurring within the community. And it's so important the power of storytelling and seeing yourself for the first time. And then obviously becoming an athlete ally has given me an amazing global platform to continually champion the challenging, homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia in sport, and have these, conversations like we are having today around LGBTQ inclusion in sports.
Thank you, Amazin. Jaycee.
Yeah, I think being a trans person and navigating through the world as a trans person, I've had to be a constant advocate for myself in general. When I started to powerlift, though, I noticed that there was a lot of response to my presence, right? There was like, how are you doing that? Like, this is like a very, stereotypically masculine like sport to be involved in, and people are looking at me with like awe and like, like, why am I here? But also I was hearing and seeing trans people, contacting me indirectly or like directly and privately saying, you're such an inspiration and this is so amazing, and asking for, opinions and help and things like that. And so like that combined with my experience with being excluded from USA powerlifting because of my transness, it felt like a moral responsibility to start to take action. And so in partnering with Pull for Pride and Athlete Ally, that's really when I decided to be vocal about what I was doing as an athlete and what I was doing as an advocate. The response has been, my supporters are fierce supporters and the opposition are fierce opposition, but it's work that needs to be done, and I'm happy to be here for it.
Thank you, Jaycee. Michael.
Yeah, so for me, I had that big decision to make back in 2016 when I chose to represent Team Jamaica, with all the legal rights out there. I do know, and I did know that it was illegal to be gay in Jamaica. But I think when I look back at my childhood and, why I did feel so suppressed and why I felt like I couldn't speak out about my feelings and emotions, was because I never had anyone to look up to. I never had any role models. And, I think it's so important to look at the Olympic Games and look at the World Championships, whether it's nationals or Kent counties, that, you look at someone and you go, I want to be like them. And, obviously for me, I'm quite a rare breed with obviously being Black and my sexuality. And I think, Jamaica already is known for athletics and, their amazing performance with, on the track and field. And I think kind of growing up when I was younger, I always used to say, people used to say to me, oh, you should be on the running track, or, why have you just been swimming? And they just didn't understand it. So I think I felt even more isolated knowing that, I was attracted to the same gender and that I couldn't speak so open about it because there was no one that I could see that I could really resonate with. So I think I speak out today just to show people, whether wherever you are around the world, that it is okay to be you. It is okay to swim and be Black. It's okay to, like the same gender and be gay and be, any sexuality, and, you will be accepted. And, kind of when I go to different competitions now, people see me and, rather than me feeling isolated and even more nervous, you train all your life for this one competition or to perform at this, this championships. And before I felt so much pressure on me to perform this way, to act a certain way. And, since coming out and being so open about it, I just enjoy it and I enjoy competing. So yeah, that's why I speak out, and just to kind of be role models to people that don't have anyone to look up to like myself.
Thank you all so much for that. And I think one of the really powerful things is you might not even know the impact you're having on so many young people. It's interesting as an organization, we get all kinds of mail from young kids about all of you about the athletes. And it's just going to be amazing to see this next generation of kids grow up in an entirely different world than we had access to or even had language for. So thank you all for being such passionate activists and allies to other social justice movements. And that's something I want to talk to you specifically about, Jaycee, as you are on this Zoom call from Minnesota, and you are somebody who has been a vocal anti-racist. You know, you've supported racial justice forever in your career. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about allyship and why allyship is important for you in terms of the racial justice space as a white ally, but also to talk about, you know, what cis allies can do, and maybe folks who are with us today can do to show up for trans folks and specifically trans athletes.
Sure. So, I mean, to start, we, meaning white people, through centuries of violence, put us where we are today. So just that statement to begin with, and we must take responsibility for those actions through ongoing allyship. So I guess that's like the first place to start, and why it's so important to me. And also it's just the right and decent thing to do. You know, all people deserve human rights, and Black Lives Matter. So, you know, I'm here to do my part in that. As far as like allyship for trans athletes in particular, I think in allyship in general, you really want to point to and amplify the people that are most affected, right? So that in an allyship, in terms of allyship, you really want to find those key figures and organizations and people who are doing the work and are putting out that content and absorbing it and self-reflecting about like your position and in how all of this works, and like what things that you are contributing to that may make, you know, an environment unsafe or an environment uncomfortable for another person. It takes time, and it's an ongoing process. It's never ending, but it's something that each and every single one of us can and should be doing.
Thank you for that, Jaycee.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about allyship, Amazin, I want to kick it over to you, because as a cis female athlete, you have been somebody who has really stood up and spoken out in support of trans athletes, and specifically trans women competing in sport. And there is unfortunately a way in which this conversation around trans inclusion in sport has divided the women's sports movement and really made a painful and violent distinction between women. And you have not allowed that to happen. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your journey, your allyship journey, and also what folks can do on this call if they're interested in learning more, or they might be nervous to speak out, you know, how you worked through that.
Sure. You know, I don't recall a moment when I wasn't an ally for the trans athletic community. And for me, it's very simple. We're part of the same community. And I understand that, you know, as a cisgender woman within the athletic community, my liberation within sports is intertwined with trans women's liberation. And we're all part of the same community. And for me, being part of a marginalized community myself, I knew what it felt like throughout my entire athletic career as a child until now, feeling like I didn't have an ally in the community, and what that would mean if another athlete stood up and raised their voice when I'm not in the room. And for me, it's all about that, because, you know, trans women are women and we're part of the same athletic community. And, you know, when when that trans person is not in the room, I need to raise my voice, because if not, I become part of that problem. And then it would go against my entire principle and my entire journey and my entire athletic activism. And I do have to have very uncomfortable conversations with cisgender women in sports all the time. I'm actually surprised how much I have to do this, because they continually want me to side with their transphobia, and I continually have to stand at that gate and say no and give them the reasons why we have to be allies for the trans community. And in terms of how my allyship has evolved over the years within this space, I feel that, you know, you can't be afraid to ask questions. I have many trans friends and fellow trans athletes that I love and admire. And I always ask that question, you know, how can I be a better ally? What kind of things can I say? What kind of things can I do? And I think, you know, never be afraid to ask that question. But for me, true allyship is raising my voice when you're not in the room and educating those as to the reasons why you cannot be transphobic in sports, and the reasons why trans women belong in sport, like cisgender women, like all athletes belong in sport, and how welcoming sports should be for everyone.
Yes. Oh, times 1,000. Thank you for that. Michael, so you just on your blog, and then I believe we reposted it this morning, wrote a really powerful piece on the Black Lives Matter movement and your experience as a Black gay swimmer, swimming for Great Britain and in Jamaica. And I would love if you could talk a little bit about that piece and some main takeaways you would love for our audience to have.
Yeah, you know, I wanted to put something out there for everyone to read, just to hear my story. You know, I think on social media and, you know, on the news, it has been so negative. And obviously, like me being here in the UK, we've seen everything going on in America. And, you know, anyone that knows me, I'm very passionate and very sensitive. And lots of videos that I've seen, I had to scroll past because I couldn't take myself into that headspace and to watch that, because you know, it's so hard that equality isn't out there for everyone, and not everyone can live without being judged for what they say or for being who they are or the skin color that they have. And, you know, seeing kind of all that negativity and, you know, everything that's going on and the protest, I did feel inspired to speak out about my journey. You know, I did get bullied when I was at school, and, you know, I was stereotyped and, you know, all of those horrible things growing up. But at the same time, I feel like it's so important to talk about a positive story. And, you know, my story was a good story. I was so lucky to, you know, represent Team GB when I got selected for my first GB team. And I was the only Black swimmer on the team. And, you know, I remember getting my kit for the very first time and leaving my parents. And, you know, not once was I ever questioned, oh, should he be on the team because he's Black? You know, not once was I ever questioned, not once was I looked at any differently. And, you know, that gave me so much confidence. And I won lots of medals for GB, and I broke barriers that I don't think even, you know, Britain knew about back then. And I just felt so inspired by that. And obviously, you know, transferring over to Jamaica, I think there are still those different stereotypes there, you know, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned, that you know, no matter how isolated you feel, no matter how alone you feel, you know, stereotypes will be everywhere. Stereotypes will, it's just in this world that we live in, and we've got to overcome, you know, those barriers and those hurdles. And yeah, like when I look at kind of what I've achieved so far, being, you know, a Black gay swimmer and going to World Championships and traveling the world, I do feel incredibly lucky. And I think it's so important to share the positive stories as well as the negative stories. But I think, you know, one of the things I did write in my blog was, even I need to educate myself on, you know, what we can do and how we can stand up. And that goes for LGBT as well. You know, I went to my very first Pride last year, and I wouldn't even say I was kind of, I appeared. And, you know, back in, it was like 3 years ago now, I was at the Manchester Arena when, you know, the Ariana Grande concert got bombed. And I think ever since then, I don't like being in crowds and I don't like being in that environment. But Pride for me last year was seeing how many allies there were out there, seeing how many people were celebrating who they were. And, although I came in briefly and I didn't stay long, that's one of the biggest things that I've taken away. And, I think us as allies, us as spokespeople, obviously I'm so proud to be a part of Athlete Ally as well, but just to, raising our story and to sharing it with everybody. And, Black lives do matter. All Black lives do matter. And yeah, I just wanted to share my positive experience, but kind of show that we can all educate ourselves. There's nothing, even when we think we've done everything or we've spoken out enough, there's always one more thing that we can divulge into. And yeah, I'm proud to be a part of that. So hopefully you can take that away from my blog. Yeah, just some positive inspiration and where we can move to in the future.
Thank you for that, Michael. And you bring up another really important point that I want to underscore. Well, two pieces really. The first is every athlete has a very unique story, and we need to highlight the breadth and depth of stories of LGBTQI plus athletes in their own words and in their own experience. And I think that very often we've only seen one kind of narrative about LGBTQI plus athletes. And one of the many things I love about the three of you is that each of you have a very different, very powerful narrative that I think many more people need to hear. And then the second piece is, and all of you have touched upon this in various ways, is this idea that we are not only one thing, that our lives are very intersectional. And so we need to, again, be able to see the full picture of that and to understand to the point that each of you has made, right? That our struggles and our liberation is bound up with one another. So thank you all for really highlighting those points. Now I'm going to ask my very thought-provoking question according to Amazin, which is, all three of you speak quite a bit. You've been on panels that talk about LGBTQI plus inclusion in sport, but what are the questions you wish moderators like me were asking that don't get asked about your experience or about the overall topic? And so, Michael, let's start with you.
That's a really good question. And I think, so many people like to ask me the question, oh, why didn't you come out sooner? Why didn't you feel like you could come out sooner? And, I think one of the biggest things that I like to say, or I love to give advice for, is, there's no right time. And I think everybody should come out when they're ready. It may be later on in life, it may be when you're 10 years old. And I don't think that there should be a label on, when everybody should come out. For me, it was 2 years ago, and that's when I felt like I accepted myself. And, like you said, every person, every athlete's story is so different. And I think it's so important to respect that. So yeah, it's not a question as such, what I think everybody should be asking, but I think it's just like noting that down, that everyone's journey is different. And, I think we all agree that we've all gone through many different journeys and we've all experienced many different things. And yeah, it's important to highlight that.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Jaycee.
I think something that I get asked a lot in interviews and in panels is, do you think that trans women have an advantage in sport? I would love it if panels would actually ask, do you think that trans people have a disadvantage in sport? And I think that would bring about a more in-depth conversation about the ways in which trans people have to wade through things like transphobia and gatekeeping in medical and gatekeeping in sport, and still are making it onto the field, onto the court, and getting to places where they succeed. And I think that really should be something that's celebrated and not turned away and turned down. It's really incredible what trans athletes are able to persevere through and still be able to compete. So I think that's probably where I would start.
I love that question. And Jaycee, I'm wondering if you can just very briefly, for folks who might not understand the policies and the process, if you can sketch, when you talk about gatekeepers and medical, just what you mean so that folks can understand really how arduous and intense the process is.
Sure. I mean, to start, we have to have letters from our physicians. We have to demonstrate that our testosterone levels have been lower than a certain amount for over 12 months. We have to have continuing testing while we're active athletes. I mean, it really is invasive in so many ways. And all of it can be shut down at a whim if an MGB is just like, you just can't compete. And the information that they're using to make those decisions isn't complete and isn't verifiable in any significant way. So we're having to deal with that on the medical side, but we're also getting pushback from people on the sidelines. We're getting pushback by vocal opposition that are really forcefully trying to make their voices heard. Alternatively, we do have a lot of support from other athletes, such as yourselves, and in organizations like Athlete Ally, Pull for Pride and Gender Justice. So I don't want to make it seem like there is no support out there, but it is pretty incredible the lengths that some trans athletes have to go through to compete at the levels that they do.
Thank you for that, Jaycee. And to Jaycee's point, it's only trans women who are policed in this way as opposed to trans men. And so if anybody wants to have a further conversation about trans sport policy, happy to do that offline, but we could have a whole separate conversation about that as well. Amazin, same question.
I'm always asked about my journey and about the challenges and barriers that Asian athletes face getting to pro level. But I feel we're at the stage when we need to start flipping the switch so everyone can really check in with themselves as athletes and sports organizations as to why we don't see Asian LGBTQ inclusion in sports. And I kind of came up with a very thought-provoking question that I've actually had to write down so I could remember it. But the question I feel that we need to go away with is, how does anti-Asianness, how does racism and homophobia influence the relationship between Asian LGBTQ athletes and the athletic community? And could these factors give reasons why, as we don't see the allyship that we need to see to champion Asian LGBTQ inclusion in sports?
That's also a really great question, Amazin. Thank you. And I have written down all of your questions because at Athlete Ally, we love feedback. We love, iterative conversations. But these are really great questions and really important ones. And I think often, again, to the conversation we were having earlier about narrative arcs, we often hear the same thing over and over again. So I wanted to hear from all of you to flip the script, so to speak. So before we move on to questions, and I did see somebody popped a question in the chat earlier, so I took note of that. And if folks have additional questions, you can feel free to start populating the chat with those while I ask my final question, which is, how should people stay involved in this fight for LGBTQI+ rights in sport? And who are some of the people that you all look to as athlete activists who you follow on social media that we should also tell other folks to learn from and follow? Amazin, let's start with you. We'll go in reverse order.
Sure. I think, there's a lot you can do, even from sitting at home in terms of, listening to panels like this, donating to organizations like Athlete Ally and Stonewall that are doing the great work on the ground. If you have a child who's LGBTQ, having conversations with the school administration around, you know, LGBTQ inclusion in sports and what that might look like. You know, I know Athlete Ally, you go to colleges and do, you know, workshops around inclusion. You know, schools may need, athletic communities, particularly within the school system, you know, they need to have these discussions, reaching out to athletes like ourselves in terms of, you know, coming and speaking with your organization around our story. In terms of the athletes that I follow, you know, I think of people like Billie Jean King, because in terms of my athlete activism, you know, I couldn't be here without people like that. I think of people like Colin Kaepernick, because when he took the knee, he really made a moment for me in terms of where I needed to go with my activism, that I had to really take it up a notch. You know, I look to Asian LGBTQ athletes, an Athlete Ally ambassador, Tad Pichikana, the first pro golf, you know, LGBTQ athlete. And for me, that is pinnacle, because I'm seeing an Asian LGBTQ person and I'm hearing their story. And it's important that me now, I still need to see a mirror image of myself in the media.
Thank you. Jaycee.
I think first and foremost, it's important to know who the people are that are working on these issues, and specifically looking at what athletes are being outspoken and supporting the work that they're doing, and amplifying the work that they're doing. From there, I think following them and seeing who they're referring to and what work they're getting inspiration from is a good way to stay connected and see what's going on. And also, yeah, looking at different orgs like, you know, Athlete Ally and Gender Justice and Pull for Pride and so many others that are working on these issues, that are litigating in courts, that are, you know, putting themselves out there and defending the rights of trans people, not only in sport, but in society. I think it's just important to know what the climate is and how that's impacting your local trans community in addition to trans athletes. So I think that's a good place to start and to really dive in to advocating for the trans community.
Thank you, Jaycee. Michael.
Yeah, you know, I agree with all of you guys, and I think, you know, raising the conversation is so important for young people, for, you know, parents, for teachers, for everybody, because with those conversations that people are having, it just allows people to be able to come out to be themselves. And, you know, for me, like, I think there's so many organizations that allow people to talk, and, you know, for me, I love following them on Instagram, because they voice so many different opinions, and it's not just athletes, it's, you know, it's everyone. And, you know, I think one of the things that I've learned from talking about issues like this and talking to different people, I really value, you know, straight allies that help and support. And as much as, you know, there's so many LGBT athletes out there speaking, I love hearing from people that have posted over Pride and who have actually, like, said how they feel about Pride. I think it's so, so important. And I feel a bit bad, Anne, because I didn't actually ask a question. I never actually told you a question to ask. But I think, you know, kind of going, hopefully next year I'll be at the Olympic Games, you know, flying my flag. And, you know, so many people say, oh, do you feel like a minority? And, you know, as an LGBT person, going to different competitions, going to different games. And, you know, I think, you know, I feel like that anyway, being a Black swimmer, being around poolside, because there's not many, you know, Black swimmers around. And I think the question that we should be asking, rather than do I feel a minority, what can we do to help athletes feel accepted at the Olympic Games, at the World Championship Games? And I know that question is already going around, and, you know, Athlete Ally have done quite a lot as well. Like, so many people to try and make Tokyo next year accept him with Pride Tokyo, and there's so many things. But I think rather than having the negative spin about how isolated people feel, making it a positive and making athletes feel accepted. So hopefully that answers both.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for adding that additional piece in. And, you know, I'm happy, just really briefly before, we have a few questions that I'll get to. And really briefly before we do that, I'm happy that you brought up Tokyo, because Tokyo is a very interesting context, because Tokyo Prefecture has comprehensive non-discrimination laws for LGBTQ folks, but the rest of Japan does not. So I think we'll see a very interesting conversation ahead of 2021 now about how do we ensure that the rights of all athletes coming from hundreds of countries around the world are protected when there aren't comprehensive non-discrimination laws. And there aren't in many countries around the world like the United States. So it's not just Japan, but, you know, so I say that to say, you know, this conversation in the sports space and about human rights in the sports space is inextricably linked to broader conversations about LGBTQI plus human rights. So yes. So the first question we got, and so panelists, if you'd like to answer, please just raise your hand, as we learned how to do before this started. How can we encourage children who are LGBTQ to think that sport is a space that they can be part of, and have them take on sports from an early age?
I will answer if no one wants to go first. You know, I really feel that it's also having conversations with the school administration and with the athletic community, and sitting them down and making sure that, you know, we can create safe and nurturing environments for LGBT kids to thrive, and also having conversations with the children as well. You know, that could be some workshops around sexuality and gender identity. That could be storytelling, you know, bringing in someone like Jaycee Cooper or someone like Michael or myself, and sharing our story, because it's so powerful when an LGBTQ kid sees someone who looks like them, who is in sports, who is highly successful. But it's also making sure that there are policies in place, and that might be also having conversations with the school district as well as the school administration of what policies do they have in place around LGBTQ children in sports, but also just being LGBTQ in the school system.
Thank you, Amazin. Michael or Jaycee, would you, sorry, Jaycee, I see your hand is up. Would you like to respond next?
Very proper here. I think to add to that too, if you're a parent and you're wanting to get involved in your kids or other kids' sporting career, you know, getting involved as a coach and being that supportive role, being in that supportive role model and helping create those environments is really important too, because we need allies and representation in coaching and training and all of these things starting from a young age as well. So I think that that's a really important thing as well.
Yeah, just to add to that, sorry, I know I haven't raised my hand, but I think it's, you know, as a young athlete myself, you know, I always looked at the Olympics and I saw different competitions that I wanted to be part of. And, you know, I think just having someone point out who is, you know, open in their sexuality, and having different things that you can read and have access to have that education, that to know that it is okay and that it is there. Because, you know, it wasn't until later life for me that I even knew that there was an LGBT community, and yeah, it really, really helped my coming out and made me feel accepted. So there's so many things on YouTube as well that I've seen that educates and is a nice thing for even like the younger kids. So yeah, just a little bit of education.
Absolutely. And so just to build on that, there are two things I want to share with you all. So the first I'm going to put in the chat box. The Trevor Project just released a new research brief on LGBTQ youth sports participation. And this is just a really important baseline and it just shows what we already know, which is that LGBTQI plus youth feel incredibly excluded from sport, don't feel safe. And so I'm so happy to, I can't remember, I'm sorry, the person who asked that question, but we all have a role to play in helping young kids feel safe in the sports space, so we can change some of these statistics. The second resource I'd like to share with you is Athlete Ally has a free online curriculum on how to build inclusive environments. We made that curriculum free for a reason, because we wanted everyone to have access to high quality education that wasn't behind a paywall, because we know there are a lot of smaller sports organizations who really want to build inclusive spaces, but may not have the funding to, pay for a trainer, et cetera. So please check out that online curriculum. I'm also happy to report we're going to be doing some updates to that soon. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to me. I will put my email in the chat box again. So those are 2 additional resources. Okay, the second question we got was, and I love this question as well, I know all of you are going to have great answers to it. What advice do you have for a straight white male working with LGBTQ plus college athletes, and what are ways to be a better ally? You can feel free to raise your hand or unmute. Amazin.
I've raised my hand because no one else raised their hand. I think when I was younger in sports, because all my coaches were straight white men, and what I wished is that I could see something within that person that they supported the LGBTQ community. If that was something small as wearing a badge. So I knew that, because obviously when you're in the closet, when I think of myself, because I was in the closet for most of my sporting career as a young adult, that, I couldn't vocal anything. So I had to see a sign. And for me, the LGBTQ pin is a sign. But also having conversations with the whole team, because, you have to facilitate entire conversations with the whole team and not just pinpoint that person you think might be LGBTQ, to be able to let those within the team know that they can have confidential conversations with you if they're struggling with their sexuality or gender identity, but also know that as a coach, you will go to the team and then have that conversation with the team, particularly if you decide to come out, because you need that support network. And also educating yourself in terms of, pronouns, going online, as I said, as Anne said, Athlete Ally has fantastic resources. And I think for me, there are just a few things as a good start.
Yeah, so for me, I came out to my coach, quite late on. It was because I was going on the television show that I came out to him. But, when I sat down with him and told him, he said, I know. And I was quite taken back, but it wasn't until I looked back at all the conversations that we had that he never felt, he never tried to single me out. He never said anything to imply that he knew. And I think that was really nice. And, when he referred to, me dating, or, he kept it open. And I think just, not necessarily, I know, like, wearing a pin and showing it, but I think, just having those conversations that there are people out there and it's fine, rather than singling out, because I feel I would have been really uncomfortable if he'd have, singled me out. And, so many people now are educated on, the different things to say. And I think it's really important not to pressure them, but just to show them that they are there. And, whether it's even something written down of talking about pride, just that, that book or something that just inspires them to carry on being them.
Absolutely. Thank you. Jaycee, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I think too, and adding on to that, really doing the research and demonstrating that some of the basic terminology and language too, because oftentimes in locker rooms and out on the field, you know, you hear some pretty derogatory things and you hear a lot of gendered things. So as a coach or a trainer, being able to do that research and put those things into practice, even if you're fumbling through it, it does show that you're making an effort. And it means a lot to people who may be in the closet or maybe trans on your team, because sometimes you don't even know. So.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And just to build very briefly off of what has been said, we talk a lot about in our trainings with coaches and athletic departments about establishing core values for your team. So, and you know, those core values can be developed in partnership with athletes so that if something happens on your team that's discriminatory, there's a very clear and easy way to call out behavior that's unacceptable when it happens, and you can use the core values to do that. And especially if core values on a team have buy-in from the athletes, it's going to resonate even more, because one of the main reasons why we all participate in sport is because it gives us a sense of community and nobody wants to feel isolated. And when people are really united around core values, that's a wonderful way to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of what kind of environment will and won't be tolerated. So we're almost at time. There are two other questions, and one also from someone asking about trans inclusion in sport, who I hope will email me, because it's a much longer conversation than we're able to have in 3 minutes. So briefly, I'm going to read both questions, and then if you all can decide what aspects you'd like to respond to in our final moments. How can someone who works in the sports industry, specifically sports broadcasting and talking in front of the camera, use their voice and platform within sports to be an ally? That's the first question. The second one, this is such a great conversation. My question is, what more can be done by NGBs or sports to support LGBTQ+ athletes? So those are two big questions. So feel free to answer what aspects of those you would like.
I will go ahead and answer regarding the sports broadcasting. You know, I feel that, you know, there's power in storytelling, you know, particularly for Asian LGBTQ athletes, because we just don't see ourselves in professional sports, or even Asian athletes. And when we do, there's such a negative narrative with sports broadcasting in terms of the language that is used around Asian people, very stereotypical, quite derogatory, and very racist. So sports broadcasting plays such a vital role in terms of how we're perceived in the community, because many people in the broader community, this might be the first time that they ever meet an Asian LGBTQ person. So we need to check in with ourselves as sports broadcasters that the narrative and language that we use isn't, you know, derogatory or racist or homophobic or biphobic or transphobic, and to make sure that you're continually using the platform to educate the community and to, you know, champion LGBTQ equality and inclusion and diversity, and make sure that you're sharing as many positive stories as you can from a diverse group of LGBTQ athletes.
Thank you, Amazin. Jaycee or Michael, would you like to respond to one or both of those questions?
I was just saying that answer really nailed it for me. So I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I think, you know, with different national governing bodies, just having that education there, you know, showing all athletes that they have somewhere to go to for that education, to find out, you know, whether it's frequently asked questions or different worries that people have. It's so important to just have somewhere to go to, have a community, you know, and I think that's what Pride is. And there's many different organizations within sport that, you know, you have places to go to. But I think specifically to obviously your sport, it would be amazing to be able to go to and see something that you're a part of, and that they are supporting you. So I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And the last piece I'll say about NGBs is there are so many ways to develop inclusive policies for LGBTQ plus athletes, especially trans inclusion policies. I would love to talk to any NGB on this call about developing trans inclusion policies, about developing really comprehensive non-discrimination language for your sport governing body. So please reach out if that's something you're interested in. And the last thing I'll say, because I know we are exactly at time, which is miraculous, I just want to thank all three of you for being here this afternoon for us, and Eastern Standard Time evening for you, Michael and Amazin. It's been such a wonderful conversation, and as always, I've learned so much from each of you, so thank you. And thank you so much to the British Embassy for creating this space. And so that's all. If you all also want to drop any contact information in the chat box, how folks can follow you on social, please feel free.